When life hung by a thread, Linda faced death's shadow with no Kwang by her side, only the unwavering care of devoted doctors and the tender love of his mother. Against all odds, she survived, stepped out of the hospital, and felt the miracle of breathing freely once more. Yet even in recovery, her heart bled with longing, her tears falling for the man she needed most. This is not just a story of survival, it is a story of love, sacrifice, and hope. Subscribe now to follow every chapter of Linda's journey and feel her heart's deepest cry. Linda lay on the hospital bed, her body frail and drained, every breath seeming to weigh heavily on her chest. The sterile smell of medicine and disinfectant lingered in the air, mingling with the soft hum of machines that monitored her fragile pulse. Days had blurred into nights, and nights into days, as she hovered in that uncertain space between life and death. It was a battle she had not chosen, but one she was forced to fight. And in that battle, she was not alone. The doctors moved swiftly and tirelessly, their hands steady, their voices calm but filled with urgency. Every small adjustment, every injection, every whispered order was a thread woven into the fabric of hope that kept Linda tethered to life. Beside her, a presence even more comforting than the sound of her own heartbeat never once left the room, Kwang's mother. Though Linda's own family was far away, fate had placed this woman by her side like an angel in human form. She sat quietly at first, holding Linda's hand through the darkest hours, her warmth seeping into Linda's cold fingers as though she were willing her back to life. When Linda stirred weakly in pain, it was Kwang's mother who brushed the damp hair off her forehead and murmured soft words of comfort, her voice steady, gentle, and full of care. She fed Linda spoonfuls of warm broth, patient even when it took minutes for Linda to swallow. She adjusted the blankets when Linda shivered, and stayed awake through the nights, whispering prayers into the silence. The doctors did everything in their power, but it was the combination of their skill and this quiet, maternal devotion that became the miracle Linda had never expected. She often found herself drifting in and out of consciousness, and in those fleeting moments of clarity, her eyes would land on the tired but unwavering figure beside her bed. There was a look in Kwang's mother's eyes that pierced Linda's heart, something between a mother's love and the strength of someone determined not to lose another soul she cared for. Though Linda was not her daughter by blood, the way she cared for her was no different from how a mother would care for her own child. As the days passed, Linda began to feel the faint stirrings of recovery. Her strength returned little by little, her body responding to the relentless care she received. She could sense the relief in the doctors' expressions, the quiet satisfaction when they noted her improving vitals. But more than the medical progress, it was the emotional bond forming in that hospital room that gave Linda hope. Each time she opened her eyes to see Kwang's mother smiling softly at her, she felt less like a patient and more like someone cherished. That feeling alone was powerful enough to heal wounds that no medicine could reach. In the stillness of the hospital nights, Linda often thought about how close she had been to the edge of life. She had felt the shadow of death brush past her, cold and merciless. Yet, against all odds, here she was still breathing, still alive. And she knew it was not just because of science or skill, but because of love. The doctors had fought for her with their knowledge, and Kwang's mother had fought for her with her heart. Between the two, Linda had been pulled back from the abyss. It was in that room, under the dim hospital light, that Linda's gratitude grew deeper than words could express. She realized how precious life was, how fragile, and how sacred the bonds of care could become. Though she longed desperately for Kwang's presence, she found solace in the thought that his mother had been there in his stead, watching, protecting, and nurturing her back to life. When the doctors finally declared that Linda was well enough to be discharged, it felt as though the heavy clouds that had been hanging above her for weeks had finally begun to part. The moment was surreal. She had grown so accustomed to the sterile walls of the hospital, the quiet shuffle of nurses' shoes, and the rhythmic beeping of machines that the thought of stepping outside seemed almost like a dream. As the wheelchair was brought to her bedside, Linda's heart trembled with a strange mixture of joy and fragility. She was free to leave the place where she had danced so close to death, yet every step forward seemed to carry the weight of the ordeal she had endured. The first breath of air outside the hospital doors was unlike anything she had ever known. The sun's rays touched her skin, warm and golden, and the breeze carried with it the scent of live trees, flowers, the faint aroma of street food from a vendor not far away. Each sensation felt heightened, as though the world itself had been reborn along with her. Linda closed her eyes for a moment, letting the air fill her lungs, savoring the simple miracle of breathing without the assistance of tubes and machines. Tears pricked at her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. And beside her, still steady and unfailing, was Kwang's mother. She held Linda's hand as they left the hospital grounds, her grip firm yet gentle, guiding her with the patience of someone who understood just how fragile recovery could be. There was a quiet pride in her smile, a glow of relief that came from knowing all her care and prayers had not been in vain. Linda glanced at her, and in that gaze lingered something deeper than words, a silent thank you, a recognition that without this woman, she might never have made it out alive. The ride home was slow, but every passing moment felt like a victory. The world outside the car window rushed by, children laughing in the distance, couples strolling together, people going about their daily routines. Linda watched it all with a newfound appreciation, her chest tightening at the realization of how close she had come to never seeing any of it again. Life, in all its ordinary beauty, felt extraordinary. And though her body was still weak, her spirit soared with the quiet determination that she would rebuild herself, piece by piece. When they finally arrived at the house, Linda's heart ached with emotion. The familiar sight of the doorway, the garden blooming softly in the sunlight, the warm scent of home, it was overwhelming. With careful steps, she entered, supported by Kwang's mother, and the moment her feet touched the threshold, tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She wasn't just walking into a house, she was stepping into a second chance at life. Every corner of the room seemed to welcome her back, whispering promises of comfort and healing. Kwang's mother guided her to a chair, fussing over her like only a mother could, adjusting pillows, preparing a cup of warm tea, making sure the windows were slightly open for fresh air. The small gestures, so tender and thoughtful, made Linda's chest tighten with gratitude. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe, not the clinical safety of a hospital, but the warm, irreplaceable safety of a home filled with love. As she sat there, sipping slowly, Linda's eyes blurred with tears. She remembered the nights she had wondered if she would ever walk out of the hospital alive, the nights when pain had nearly swallowed her whole. Yet here she was, breathing in the comfort of a home, surrounded by kindness, gifted a future she once thought might never come. The moment was simple, but to Linda, it was nothing short of miraculous. That night, as silence settled over the house and the world outside softened into darkness, Linda sat alone by the window, her heart aching with a longing she could no longer contain. The glow of the moonlight spilled gently across her face, illuminating the quiet tears that slid down her cheeks. Though her body was on the path to healing, her soul still carried wounds that no medicine could mend. She had survived, yes, but she had survived without him. Kwang. The one person she needed most in her darkest hour was nowhere to be found when death hovered so close. The thought of it pierced her chest like a blade, leaving a hollow ache that no amount of comfort could erase. She remembered those moments in the hospital when she had hovered on the edge, barely clinging to consciousness. In her delirium, she had imagined him by her side, imagined the warmth of his hand holding hers, the familiar sound of his voice whispering that everything would be all right. But when she opened her eyes, reality had always been harsher, the steady hands of doctors, the tender presence of his mother, yet never him. A part of her wanted to be grateful. After all, she had not been alone, but another part of her, the most vulnerable part, felt abandoned. She had wanted him, needed him, and his absence left a scar. The more she thought about it, the harder her tears fell. She pressed her palms against her chest, as if to still the storm raging inside. "Why weren't you here, Kwang?" she whispered into the silence. The walls of the room swallowed her voice, but in her heart, she imagined it reaching him somehow, wherever he might be. Every fiber of her being longed for him to hear his laugh, to see the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, to feel his embrace that once made her believe nothing in the world could harm her. Now, without him, she felt small, fragile, and unbearably alone. Yet amid the sorrow, another truth quietly bloomed: love had been her strength all along. It was love for Kwang that had given her the courage to fight when her body wanted to surrender. It was love that had whispered to her, even in the haze of fever and pain, that she must hold on, that she must live, if only to see him again. And it was love, too, that made her tears fall now, because absence had not dimmed her feelings but magnified them 100-fold. Linda knew she owed her life to the doctors and to Kwang's mother, whose devotion had been a light in her darkest days. But it was the thought of Kwang, the memory of his smile, the echo of his voice, the dream of a future with him that had kept her heart beating when everything else seemed lost. In a way, he had been there with her, not in body, but in spirit, woven into the very strength that had carried her back from the brink of death. Looking out the window, Linda allowed herself to hope. The stars shimmered above, countless and eternal, and she wondered if Kwang, wherever he was, might be looking at the same sky. Maybe he felt her longing across the distance, maybe he missed her just as fiercely. The thought brought a fragile smile to her tear-stained lips. Though the ache in her heart remained, so too did the unwavering flame of her love for him. In that quiet, she made herself a promise: she would wait. She would heal, not just her body but her spirit, and she would keep holding on to the hope that one day Kwang would return. And when that day came, she would tell him everything: how she had fought for life because of him, how much she had missed him, how deeply she loved him. Until then, she would endure the silence, because even in his absence, Kwang was her reason to live.